Treasures in a basket. Through a narrow mountain pass almost completely closed in by pink granite walls rode Count Constantine Tischendorf. Ibrahim, his Bedouin guide, was ahead, and behind him followed his camel driver. The sun beat fiercely upon the Sinai desert and parched the throats of the travelers and their weary beasts. Nothing broke the heat. It was reflected back and intensified by the walls of granite. Tischendorf looked at the barren landscape. Here and there he saw a clump of tamarisk or a camel's thorn bush. The bare peaks, fantastic in many-colored formations, seemed to blend into the blue sky. As he rode through the narrow pass, the man thought of the Israelites who had struggled over this same desert hundreds of years before, searching for the promised land. It must have seemed to them, as it did to him, that the land was very far away. "How much further to the monastery?" called Tischendorf wearily. "How long will it take? Do you think we can make it by tomorrow night?" "You are full of questions," responded the Bedouin guide. "You are asking for information that I do not know. If the camels do not balk, and the Count does not become ill, and Allah wills it, we should reach the monastery by tomorrow night." Reaching the summit of the mountain pass, the tired travelers sought refuge from the blistering heat beneath a large outcropping of granite. "Tonight we shall find sweet rest at the oasis of Firan," said Ibrahim, to encourage his exhausted companion, "but we must hurry lest the darkness overtake us." Long evening shadows mantled the trail which descended into the fertile valley of Firan. The three weary travelers spurred their animals on, and they reached the palm-covered floor of the valley at dusk. Tischendorf sank wearily onto the rug spread for him. He looked up at the brilliant stars sparkling in the deep blue sky. Tomorrow, if Allah was willing, as his Bedouin guide had said, he would reach his goal. He thought of the story he had heard from the lips of the monk in the Vatican garden the previous year. Tischendorf knew he had only a small chance of finding a manuscript of the Bible, but somewhere the precious books must be hidden, and, God willing, he would find them. Tomorrow he would see what treasures the library of St. Catherine's Monastery held. The travelers arose before dawn and made hasty preparations for the final day of their journey. The cool parts of the day, morning and evening, were the best times for travel on the Sinai Peninsula. The small caravan followed a narrow gorge between walls of granite where the going was difficult, but the sweet music of a wren filtered down the canyon, making the hard journey bearable. Occasionally, Bedouin travelers passed, returning from the annual May festival of the Muslim prophet Sila, which takes place near St. Catherine's Monastery. It was late afternoon when Ibrahim drew his camel to a halt and pointed ahead. Tischendorf shaded his eyes with his hand and looked in the direction his guide was pointing. Rising before him like a great stone altar was the Mount Sinai range, lonely and majestic against the bright desert sky. Tischendorf's thoughts went at once to experiences of the Israelites as he saw the vast flat plain stretching before the mountains. After a moment, Tischendorf asked, "Where is the monastery?" "Patience, sir," Ibrahim said. "We shall see it when we pass the hill of the golden calf." When they passed the low hill, Ibrahim pointed again. There against the foot of the Sinai ridge stood the monastery. Its massive rock walls formed a square enclosing the buildings. On top of the wall, midway on one side, Tischendorf saw the minaret the monk had told him about as they had visited it in the garden of the Vatican Library. The tower gleamed in the sun just as it had when it had saved the monastery and the monks from the invading Moslem army. "Come, Abraham," Tischendorf cried. "Let us hasten." "You are right. It is the will of Allah that we reach our destination today." As they traveled up the valley to the monastery, Tischendorf saw giant cypress trees clustering around the high walls. Green grass and shrubs grew on the hill beyond the wall. "On the hillside are great springs," Abraham explained. "There are no other such springs in all these mountains. The water is cold and clear." The camels stopped in the shadow of the wall. The camel driver forced the animals to kneel, and the men stepped to the ground. A voice came from the top of the 50-foot stone wall. "Greetings, travelers!" "Greetings!" shouted Abraham. "May we share your hospitality?" From a small gabled room attached to the wall, a platform began to descend, lowered by ropes. A monk stepped from the platform and greeted the new arrivals. "Welcome to St. Catherine's. I am Constantine Tischendorf. My Bedouin companion is Abraham. We have a letter of introduction from the Archbishop." Tischendorf handed the letter to the monk. "You must be weary from your travels. How far have you come?" inquired the monk, unsealing the letter. "We left the Faran oasis early this morning, and have traveled all day," the count said. "It brings pleasure to me, to our tired bodies, to be here." "And a pleasure to have you," added the monk. "You may leave your supplies here, and they will be sent to your cell. I will tell the patriarchs that you have come. We have so few visitors. I know he will be delighted to meet you." The monk motioned for Tischendorf and Abraham to step onto the platform. "This is the only means of entry into the monastery," he explained. "It is necessary for our protection that there be no openings in the wall of our fortress." The count and Abraham stepped onto the small platform, suspended by ropes from the room on the edge of the wall. The ropes groaned under the weight of the monks, turned the winch, and hoisted the platform to the top. The monk led the visitors down a winding stone stairway to the ground on the side of the wall. "You may remain here. The patriarch will not keep you waiting," the monk said as he left them and disappeared into the shadows of a corridor. A tall, sun-tanned priest soon approached, extending his hand in a gesture of welcome. "We are happy to have such distinguished visitors at St. Catherine's. We hope your stay will be pleasant. Come with me, I'll show you your cell." The priest led the way through a maze of short, narrow corridors. Tischendorf leaned toward his companion and whispered, "The place seems deserted. I had assumed that St. Catherine's would be alive with monks." "Perhaps this is the hour of prayer. They pray much, you know," ventured Abraham. They followed the patriarchs along the long, narrow hallway, where every footstep echoed. Oil lamps were burning at intervals to give light to the windowless hallway. Presently the patriarch stopped and took a small lamp from a shelf. Opening a narrow door, he entered a room. When he had lighted a candle, he spoke. "Here is your room. You will find your cell meager but sufficient." Before leaving, he added, "And if you are tempted to complain, remember that our master had no place to lay his head." Tischendorf gave the room closer inspection. The furniture consisted of two narrow platforms of wood to be used for sleeping, and a small three-legged table. A small golden cross hung on the wall. "Indeed, our cell is meager," said the count, stretching himself out on one of the platforms. "I'm inclined to feel that life at St. Catherine's is exceedingly drab and dull." He sat up quickly. "But should I find an early Greek Bible here, this place would be anything but dull," he added, "and drab." Sleep overtook Abraham easily, but not Tischendorf. He could think only of his purpose in coming to St. Catherine's. At 4 o'clock in the morning, the bell in the tower called the monks to worship. Tischendorf and Abraham joined them in the chapel. At the conclusion of worship, the monks silently filed into the dining room. The two guests were seated next to the patriarch. A thin, warm gruel made of wheat and rye, served in clay mugs, was placed before them. The patriarch spoke to Tischendorf. "Did you sleep well?" "As well as can be expected," returned the Count. "It's a wonder you slept at all," continued the patriarch. "It's the beds, you know. They make it miserable for our visitors. I must admit I've slept on more comfortable beds." "Then you did not sleep because you have a troubled conscience. You are wrong. It is the purpose of my wish to visit St. Catherine's that caused me to lie awake last night." "Ah, so that's it. What brings a scholar like the famous Tischendorf to St. Catherine's? You are thinking of joining us?" Tischendorf smiled. "The fame of your library has spread throughout Europe. God has marvelously preserved this monastery, and that was a good trick of St. Alban's, a Muslim minaret next to a Christian tower. Alban's reward in heaven will be great," interrupted the patriarch. "I am a student of the Holy Scriptures," continued Tischendorf, "and I have been dedicated to the search for copies of the Scripture." Tischendorf paused, fearing to reveal that it was the ancient manuscript he sought. If the monks knew his desire, they might keep these from him. He simply said, "That is why I've come to St. Catherine's. Some of the best Bibles ever written are in our library. The newer copies especially will please you. Elegant, superb." "May I have permission to visit the library and see for myself?" asked the Count. "Indeed you may, but let me caution you that Father Nicholas, our librarian, will keep a sharp eye on you." The priest leaned toward the Count and whispered, "He knows you are a Protestant. He detests Protestants." The monk, who was the librarian, showed the books to the Count and answered his eager questions. He showed him the newer books, but Tischendorf kept going back to look at the old scrolls. The monk noticed this. "Come," he said. "Down the hall we have other books." The Count followed his guide down the great beamed hall. Near the door was a huge woven basket. Tischendorf paused by it and saw that it was full of sheets of manuscript, torn and brown. He picked up one and began to examine it. The librarian stopped to wait for him. "Those are very old," he said. "Surely you cannot be interested in this pile of refuse. They are too ancient to keep longer. The Archbishop insists that we find room for newer copies of the Scriptures. So these are to be burned. 2 baskets have been burned already." Tischendorf seemed not to notice the impatience of the librarian. He continued to examine sheet after sheet. He was filled with growing excitement, but he tried to control his feelings of joy. Here among these discarded sheets of parchment, he had discovered a number of pages from a very old Greek Bible. Here, waiting to be burned, was a treasure for which he had been searching.